my research is on the impact of AI on the nursing labor market, right? But before we start, a little bit about me. So my name is Bill Wang, 16 from Fremont, California, kind of in this area of the Bay Area. I am high school senior, and I wanted to give my thanks to my mentors at DTS and SAMD. Without them, this presentation would not have been possible, and I would literally have no idea what I'm doing. So thank them. I want to thank them so much for their continued support. So let's start off. Why? Right? Why did I choose this? Well, AI is the new next biggest thing, right? And the latest in honestly many waves of automation. And it's poised to disrupt workers in many areas. Now, AI is known as a LST or a labor saving technology. And I think it's particularly significant because unlike many other automated technologies, AI can target high level occupations, right? Occupations that require maybe like a higher degree of education, kind of like data analysis, market analysis, or even stuff like sales representatives, right? And it's also predicted to simply have a drastic effect on the economy, right? Now, while many studies have been conducted on the effect of AI on the economy as a whole, there's not so much that focus on specific occupations, right? And that's what I wanted to accomplish through this project, right? And for this, I chose medical care because it's directly linked to human lives, right? And therefore is a significant industry. It not only competes with other companies, but also against death and disease. And because of this, AI will begin to be implemented, and has already been tentatively implemented into the medical care industry. And despite providing necessary labor as 42% of the entire healthcare sector, nurses tend to feel underappreciated or even burnt out. The HRSA, Human Resources and Service Administration, reported that there is a current shortage of nurses and that in 2023, there was a 91% increase in layoffs from the previous year, right? And finally, this is just something that hits close to home because I have an older sister who's currently studying nursing in college. And I know maybe hopefully better than the average person how hard she works. She has to balance both grades and works. She has to wake up at 5 a.m. and 6 a.m. to go to work every day. And recently she started taking 12-hour shifts overnight in the middle of the day. So with this in mind, I think analysis can help healthcare predict and respond to AI, making sure that the implementation not only makes sure that the quality of patient care doesn't decrease, but also to avoid job displacements, because historically, labor-saving technologies have often come at the cost of the worker. And it also requires re-education, which not only needs money, but also time. And thus, I've posed the question, how will AI impact the nursing labor market? Well, in this slideshow, I'll be going over the labor market. What is the labor market, and how does the nursing labor market look like now, which I just went over. And for LSTs, I'm going to be looking at historical context, right? Historical LSTs, what they are, and what patterns can we extrapolate from them. Next, in section 3, I really start digging into nursing as my case study, right? And I make a framework-based analysis, determining the degree of exposure, which is just generally how much AI will affect it, and complementarity, which is kind of how well they work together. For example, a high complementarity occupation would be, I guess, taxi drivers and Google Maps, because they work well together. While a low complementarity would be probably customer service, because generative AI is more likely to have kind of a substitutive effect. Finally, I take out all of my previous conclusions and I apply it to the nursing labor market. So yeah. So the labor market really refers to supply and demand, kind of that relationship with labor as the focus commodity, right? And the basic tenets of supply and demand apply. So in this scenario, supply would kind of be like the educated workers who are willing to work, and demand would kind of be how much these employers are trying to get these workers, right? Usually demonstrated through their wages, right? Because that demonstrates how much they want the worker. And things such as increased supply, which be job competition, when supply exceeds demand, that could put downward pressure on wages demand, in which their wages are smaller. And for certain regions, like in the Bay Area, where blue collar workers are more sparse, and supply is lower than demand, and they might have a larger wage, right? And next, I start looking at their historical context. So labor-saving technologies, what they do is that they automate tasks previously immune to automated technologies. And these go under heavy scrutiny in conversations because while they have the chance to increase productivity and decrease labor time, they also raise concern for livelihoods because they cause job displacement, right? And in order to really, and while AI is kind of new, unique, and maybe hard to predict, we can look at historical patterns and try and see how that applies to right now, right? So basically, one of the first examples of automation was during the first industrial revolution, in which we had mechanization of low-skilled jobs, and we had a shift from the cottage industry, in which there's a decentralized system where people worked at their own home and they produced their own things, to factory systems where they kind of group together. And this was due to the creation of machines such as the spinning jenny in 1764, and more importantly, the steam engine, right? And this had harsh working conditions and meager wages. That's probably an understatement. But the economic impact of mechanization was probably more positive because it decreased the demand for manual labor in rural areas, which led to urbanization. And it also boosted the standard of living because these companies were able to produce these materials for cheaper and with less time, right? And thus people were able to kind of afford these things more, and that led to the rise of consumerism. We also see similar patterns more recently in the 1950s, in which several jobs were lost. Some people said it was due to automation. We saw a net gain in the economy with 7 million jobs being produced, estimated, although it did lead to job displacement and sector destruction, right? And while AI is pretty unique for targeting high-level jobs, it's not the only LSC that target high-level jobs. So accounting is, well, still a high-level job, but in the 19th century, when it was first kind of growing, it was also considered a high-level job because it required literacy and mathematical expertise, right? It was affected by typewriters and calculators. And we saw a really interesting effect, kind of like a sort of task workforce polarization, which is one more menial archival task job, which is bookkeeping, and usually paid less, usually older people, usually women, right? Usually minorities, while accounting was more of the kind of elite, right? And their traditional roles were changed to become more advanced, right? They started including things such as data analysis within their occupation. So this text has a lot of this slide has a lot of text. We're not going to go over all of it. Essentially what it is that it's taken from ISCO, which is the International Standard of Occupations, classification of occupations. And what it did is that it took the nursing occupation and it split it into a series of tasks, which I could individually analyze to look at the degree of complementarity the nursing task has with AI technology, right? And you'll notice I voted A because there was something really interesting that I found in A that I kind of wanted to share, right? And it's kind of an example of my individual analyses. So when I looked at A, I noticed that it said, according to the practice and standard of modern nursing. In order to find the standards of modern nursing, I kind of looked around on the internet and I found the Code of Ethics by the American Nurses Association. And something interesting I found in that is that in section 1, it states that nurses are not only supposed to take care of their physical being, but also their mental and spiritual being. And this is particularly interesting because in 1966, Joseph Weizenbaum created one of the world's first chatbots called Eliza, and it had a therapeutic role because he noticed certain patterns within a therapeutic conversation. And he also noticed that normal people would have quote unquote delusional thoughts about Eliza, right? Noticing that they got increasingly emotionally attached and they would feel emotions of betrayal when he said, "This is not your personal therapist. I can read all of the chat logs." Unfortunate for them. So what this proves is that AI has the ability to kind of like transcend what we normally think of robots and automation because it's not restricted. Because normally people point out that there's like a human touch that's missing when it comes to robots, right? Robots can't replace the human presence, except it sort of can because because people can project their emotions, the emotions that they feel onto things that really aren't morphical, right? Really interesting effect showing how these new technologies, these new advancements can really lead to this transcendence of normal barriers. So this is a task matrix, a table of all of the levels of complementarity. We see a kind of a variation of levels of complementarity. Certain tasks such as E, which was applying bandages, kind of has a low exposure because I focused on current and near future AI technology. And right now, there's not as much physical applications. So I looked at AI in two ways. One as simply a automative technology, and other as a technology that is more disruptive, that actually changes the role overall, right? And I found that due to the varying levels of complementarity, it's unlikely to become a obsolete job. Nevertheless, demand for jobs can still increase or decrease because in saturated regions where market share can't be expanded as much, right? Where market share can't be expanded much, there might not be as much expansion opportunities. And in unsaturated markets, there might require higher digital infrastructure. As a transformative technology, we can predict kind of like a polarizing effect on the workforce once again with physical care nurses and overseer nurses, which is kind of a framework that I created that would kind of predict what happens to nurses afterwards AI is implemented. So finally, we can go to our conclusions. Historically, LSTs have increased productivity and the standard of living, albeit sometimes at the cost of workers. In section 3, we found that nursing is a high exposure occupation with varying levels of complementarity, and certain tasks that are thought to be more impervious are more vulnerable than usually thought. And in 4, we find that there's a task polarization effect when we look at AI as a transformative technology, and the unsaturated markets may require higher interest investment, and saturated markets might lead to a decrease in employment, right? And just a couple more things. I look at nursing as an umbrella term, and I kind of ignore the West for-profit healthcare incentives, right? So these are future routes for research into this certain area. So thank you all so much for listening. And do you have any questions?
Bill, this is fantastic. I actually have a couple of questions, but if the audience has any questions, feel free to ask those in the Q&A section. One of my questions that I had, because you talked a little bit about the AI tasks, right? I'm curious about, are there specific tasks within the nursing field that are most susceptible to AI?
Yeah. So one thing that nurses have to do is that some nurses have to do is that they have to create something called a patient care plan, right? In which like it'll be kind of stuff like 6 months of physical therapy or like every day at 3 p.m. feed them food, something like that, right? And the thing is there's a lot of historical precedent, right? There's a lot of historical data on what stuff like on what a plan can be for a patient, right? Now, obviously, there's some obstacles, like there's, patient data security. You're not just allowed to like use patient's data. But if it were to be overcome, which might be a moral hazard, and I mentioned it inside of my paper, um, like AI, generative AI could be very easily trained on this massive pool of information and previous information to create these plans, right? And I think generative AI excels at creating this sort of like kind of formal task step by step kind of stuff.
Mm, got it. No, that's very interesting. I think one other question that just came in is what was the hardest part of your research project, like the most challenging part?
Yeah, I'll definitely say the hardest part of my research project is this section, right? I mean,
Mm,
it wasn't even the main point of my project because my main point was to look at the labor markets, right? But in order to look at the labor market, I first had to see how much of nurses, like how much of their job is going to be more susceptible to AI replacement. And I went through each individual aspect of this and I analyzed each individual task, right? And it was a difficult challenge, right? To find, examples, to find evidence, right? To look through like modern kind of nursing papers. But it was pretty fun, yeah.
cool. And then one more question that came through. I don't have no AI background, so this is probably one you may understand better than me. But could AI hallucinating detriment this?
So what do you mean by AI hallucinating? Would it be the misrepresentation or like the wrongful determination of data?
Yeah, I think that Daniel, who's asking this question, may have been referencing the answer to your first question about the tasks. So AI hallucinating with the different tasks that nurses may have to do.
Yeah. So hallucinating. So I would assume that would be like the wrongful interpretation of data, right?
Yeah, I
So I
think
actually
that's what it
point
means.
up, yeah. So I reached upon this, and especially when it comes to monitoring pain and discomfort, right? I offer that you can use computer vision, recognition, and maybe like brain stuff to help look at like how much pain a certain patient is feeling. But
Mhm,
there is a pretty significant moral hazard, especially when it comes to diagnosing and giving painkillers, right? Because if AI represents this wrongly, then it could definitely lead to abusing, right? And that's
mhm,
why I offered that in AI as a transformative technology, I offered overseer nurses, right? And these are going to interpret and analyze AI tasks rapidly, right? There are certain aspects that AI can't cover because every patient has a nuanced background, right? Every patients might respond to pain differently as well, right? Like, for example, those that have chronic pain, they're not going to be as receptive to pain in general as as a normal person.
mhm.
So there's definitely because it's not going to be obsolete because there's always going to be some level of like a human to make sure, especially since AI isn't a super trusted technology.